I will call to order the meeting for Wednesday, April 9th. May I have roll call, please?
Mayor Allen,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Clayton, Commissioner Kaler,
Present.
Commissioner Crowley,
Present.
Commissioner Skidmore.
Present.
I would like to welcome everyone here in the audience as well as everyone watching or listening at home. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation by Pastor Dakota Smith. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, guys, thank you for letting me bring the nursery with me today. I just want to share a brief verse from God's Word. It's Proverbs 17, verse 3. It says, "The refining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the hearts." And if we were to put that into today's language, it basically says, fire tests the quality of precious metals. And so too do trials test our character and our status of heart. Trials test us for a healthy callus. It tests our motives. It tests our credibility, all of those things. And so it is no secret, being in leadership myself, that with leadership positions there comes trials, there comes criticism, discouragement, sometimes unnecessary criticisms, and you got to stand under it. And I just want to encourage you and let you know that we pray for you all the time. We love Ottawa. We're going to be here for a long time, and we thank you for your leadership. So if I could pray with you today, that'd be great. Father, thank you so much for our leaders. We know that you love them, and thank you, God, that you've called them to this post. Lord, we pray that you would give them wisdom. Wisdom is not created. Wisdom is discovered. And so we pray that you would give them wisdom from above and that they'd be able to utilize that wisdom with the decisions for our city. Thank you so much for them. Give them clarity of thought and help them as they go through the trials of being in this post for their character to be on display. So thank you for the difficulties in life. Thank you for their leadership. Please give them great grace as they work through today's agenda. I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you guys very much. Take care.
Thank you very much, Pastor Smith, and thank you for your special guests today. We will move on to public comments. Do we have any registered?
We have none registered.
Okay. We will skip over item 7 with nothing under that column. Item 8 is the consent agenda, which includes minutes from the April 2nd, 2025 special call meeting and minutes from the April 2nd, 2025 regular meeting, and the agenda approval. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. At this time, I'd like to give the commissioners a chance to declare any conflict or communication they've had that might influence their ability to consider today's issues impartially. Seeing and hearing none, we will move past item 10 with nothing under that heading, and item 11A.
Review of economic development incentive tools.
Tyler Ellsworth and Bruce Kimmel will provide an overview of available economic incentive tools. I believe they're both available via Zoom today.
They are, and I'm just going to be the clicker. So I'm going to let them do most of the heavy lifting on the discussion. And just to give you a brief overview, this is really good timing. And for Bruce and Tyler who are online, it just so happens that there are items on the agenda later that include or that have interest from the Chamber, FCDC, I believe Main Street's online, and there's a developer in the room. So this discussion about development incentives is actually, we have a really good group of people that can hear this. And this is intended for you to, just as a review. You've heard all of this before, I'm sure, as we try to do this every so often, so that it's just more of an education tool, not just for you as the commission or just for staff, but also for the public. So interested businesses, and as we move towards wanting to see more growth and all of those things, comes the ask a lot of times for development incentives. And so that's why we're here. And I am going to, just to get us started, the policy that you currently have in place was put in place in 2019. There probably were processes and things before that. Maybe that was even amended resolution. I don't know. But I do know that even in the next several weeks, we'll probably be bringing at least a portion of that policy back to you to consider some amendments for some of the items such as RHID, the way it's written. Currently doesn't allow some of the opportunity for some of the applications that might be coming to you in the very near future. So our policy is in place to give you guidance for some of those incentive requests, and the purpose of it is to basically be able to bring those things that you need in your community, which is commercial, industrial, and residential growth. So with that, I'm going to, I guess, turn it over to Bruce and Tyler, and they have an idea of who's going to talk for which item, and also for under each one of the tools, give you an opportunity to ask questions if you want, or you can also ask questions at the end of the presentation.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Bruce Kimmel with Ellers, the city's development finance advisor, and it's nice to be with you today. As Melanie noted, Tyler and I are going to just go through some of the key economic development tools in fairly short order, but please do stop us along the way if you have questions. We want this to be conversational, and some of these tools are a little bit wonky in their own ways, and they may not all be completely transparent at first blush. So we welcome any clarifying questions that you might have. The first tool that we wanted to cover are IRBs, or industrial revenue bonds. And you think of bonds as debt that the city issues for streets and utility projects and all sorts of core public purposes. And IRBs in this context are not at all like that. These are bonds, and even bonds is a little bit of a misnomer in some ways, that are issued to help advance private development. But usually the main reason for this tool to be used are two reasons. One is to provide a sales tax exemption on construction materials, and that part of the IRB statute is very commonly used. And then another portion is to provide property tax abatements on new development. And that is also fairly regularly used, not quite as frequently as the sales tax exemption. But these are really the main reasons why a city might enter into an IRB arrangement with a developer is really to provide that sales tax exemption and property tax abatement in some cases. That said, there does need to be a bond issue of sorts. Tyler can certainly attest to that as the bond attorney. But what happens is the developer really buys the bonds themselves. So it's kind of like a conduit deal of sorts, where the city is the middleman, but you're not actually taking out debt that you have to repay in any way, shape, or form. It's really, again, meant to facilitate these other purposes of IRBs. One thing I wanted to note also, as Melanie noted, the city policy highlights, you do have a pretty strong limitation in the current policy of up to a 50% abatement for up to 10 years. There are additional percentage considerations that can apply in specific situations. And you only want to do these deals for projects that have a certain amount of critical mass. There is time and effort involved as well as expense. And even though the developer should be paying the city's expenses, we want to be mindful of the city staff time and commission time that's involved as well. So the city's policy is that minimum issuance size needs to be at least $2 million. And there is a city origination fee with IRBs as well. Moving on to constitutional tax abatement, this is really a similar tool in terms of providing tax abatement assistance for projects, but it is typically only used for types of businesses and developments that aren't covered under the IRB statutes. And the city's policy highlights are the same. So if you've got a project and it demonstrates a need for assistance, and the city wants that development in the community, but it doesn't really qualify for IRB, and maybe it doesn't qualify for TIF, or it's not a good fit for TIF, then a constitutional tax abatement could be a good solution in that kind of circumstance.
Can you give us an example of that, if one that wouldn't qualify on that constitutional tax?
Tyler, it's been a while since I've done a constitutional tax abatement. Do you have one off the top of your head that would be a good example?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Good afternoon, commissioners. Typically, we see constitutional abatement used where, for whatever reason, we don't have an IRB in place. So, for instance, we can't do an IRB for a retailer, but actually an example is a project that we just recently completed with your staff. The Hasty Awards expansion is, depending on how you classify their business, either a retailer or a manufacturer. And in that case, we use the constitutional tax abatement tool to treat them as a manufacturer that's eligible for abatement. Because if there's any question of whether they're a retailer as well, we could not grant them an abatement under the IRB Act. So that was a little bit of a nuanced answer, but that's a real life example of a situation where we used a constitutional tax abatement because IRB as a tool didn't get us all the way home.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions about IRB tax abatement or constitutional tax abatement? Okay, if not, then we can move on to neighborhood revitalization programs, or NRPs. This is a tax rebate program, so somewhat similar to TIF, but not quite the same mechanism in that, you know, with TIF, and Tyler will talk more about this or I guess I get the next TIF slide, sorry. You know, you pay your taxes and then most often you get some of that back in a pay-as-you-go reimbursement. Well, NRP is somewhat similar in terms of being a property tax abatement and our property tax rebate, excuse me. So in this situation, property owners would receive an incremental property tax rebate back to them based on the value of the improvements made to existing structures or new construction. And the city policy dictates that applications for NRP assistance are reviewed by not only the city, but the school district and the county, and that there needs to be some critical mass there as well, that the improvement projects need to increase the valuation of the property by at least 25%. And then we probably could talk about TIF for a very long time, but again, this is just a recap of some of the core tools that are commonly used for economic development in Kansas. So with TIF, and most of you are probably pretty familiar with the mechanism, this is a way to capture incremental new property value from a new development and the taxes that come from that incremental new value. Similarly, you can use sales tax in the same way, where you're capturing incremental new sales tax from a new project and using that to help fund redevelopment. You can do it a couple of different ways. Not so common is to issue bonds and then to repay the bonds from either the property TIF or the sales TIF. More commonly, you see projects with pay-as-you-go arrangements where the developer themselves pays those TIF eligible expenses from their own equity or from their own private financing, and then you use those incremental new taxes to reimburse them for, again, some or all of those TIF eligible expenses. It's really important, and the city policy highlights this, that you identify and clearly define the eligible project costs. You don't want any sort of mushiness, if you will, around what costs are being reimbursed with the TIF. And as you can see, the preference, and appropriately so, is for pay-as-you-go reimbursement. There's much less risk in that type of approach if the TIF doesn't measure up. then the pay-as-you-go note just pays less back to the developer. Whereas with bonds, even though there are ways you can secure bonds with developer guarantees and things of that nature, it's very, very difficult to eliminate the risk altogether. And so if you are issuing TIF bonds, you really want to make sure you understand why and that the project really merits that level of assistance, needs that level of assistance, and that you very much want the project in the community. One other thing I'll just note under TIF, going back up to eligibility, typically TIF is used, as we say, from the ground down and not from the ground up. So generally not used for vertical construction. You're looking at putting in infrastructure. Sometimes it can be used for land acquisition costs, site remediation, things of that nature. Tyler's going to talk a little bit more about some different flavors of TIF, if you will, but are there any questions about the core TIF mechanism itself or how the city can use it before I turn it over to him? Okay, and we can always circle back. Again, TIF has a lot of different nuances and complexities, but at this point, will turn it over to Tyler to talk about RHIDs.
All right. Thank you, Bruce. And I think that was a good segue. So RHIDs are very much kind of a specialized kind of TIF. They are a tax increment tool. So as Bruce explained, the increase in valuation that's resulting from a development project creates increased taxes. And just like TIF, an RHID redirects that increased tax revenue, and it redirects it back to pay the costs for land acquisition or infrastructure for the project, or in some cases, RHID tax increment can be used to reimburse the costs of vertical construction. The RHID Act allows for bonds to be issued, but typically we see this used on a pay-as-you-go basis, just as we see TIF used on a pay-as-you-go basis. A couple items that make RHID a bit unique from TIF is that RHIDs require approval from the Secretary of Commerce before an RHID is created. And the eligibility for RHID has to do with the need for quality housing in the community rather than the typical eligibility for TIF, which relates to conservation areas or findings of blight and different kinds of deterioration of site improvements, buildings, things like that. The RHID Act does require a feasibility study, and that's something when we do RHID projects that typically we have Bruce or others engaged to help with, make sure that the tax increment from the project that's generated is sufficient to pay the costs of the infrastructure, things that we're reimbursing from that tax increment. And then with respect to the city's policy, RHID can be used for 10 or more rental homes, and your policy also requires a but-for analysis. What that means is when a developer comes to the city asking for RHID assistance with their project, staff and your consultants work together to figure out what that need for assistance is. What's the dollar amount that is necessary to make the project financially successful, taking into account the developer risk and making sure we're sizing the RHID assistance in terms of dollars in an amount that's appropriate. Any questions on that? All right, then I think we can move on to another set of tools. And we're going to talk about community improvement districts, and then following this briefly about transportation development districts. So community improvement districts first are an additional sales tax that can be levied by the city within a defined district. That sales tax can be used to pay debt service on bonds that are issued, or it can be used on a pay-as-you-go basis. Typically, we see CID sales tax reimbursing the developer's costs on a pay-as-you-go basis rather than the issuance of CID revenue bonds. CID is a flexible tool in that it can be used for public or private infrastructure or even public or private vertical improvements. There's a lot of latitude that's allowed under the statute for different kinds of projects, different kinds of costs. It can be used for commercial or residential projects. You more frequently see it used for commercial projects because a residential project, unless the project has commercial and residential components, a residential project isn't going to generate the kind of sales tax that you want in order to be available to reimburse your project costs. From a policy standpoint, the city requires a minimum investment of $250,000 for a CID project. Typically, the city has a preference for pay-as-you-go reimbursement to a developer rather than the issuance of CID revenue bonds. And for CIDs, the city collects an annual administration fee of 5% of the revenue that's generated. Any questions on CIDs? Okay, and the next tool is very similar to a CID, is a Transportation Development District, a TDD. TDD is a little bit older statute than the CID Act, and we don't see TDDs used very frequently anymore. Most projects that would be completed with a TDD are at this point completed as a CID instead. TDDs are add-on sales taxes or special assessments that are imposed within a particular district. And the sales tax or the special assessments can be used for transportation-related improvements, roadways, parking, that sort of thing. Because TDDs are limited to those kinds of improvements and aren't quite as broad in terms of its applicability as the allowable uses and projects under the CID Act. That's why we see the CID Act used instead. In terms of examples of TDDs, though, the city had a TDD at the Love's truck stop that was in place for several years and was terminated a few years ago. So that's an example of a TDD being used in a local project. In terms of city policy highlights for a TDD, TDDs can be used if the project results in building transportation infrastructure that the city wouldn't otherwise build, if the project stimulates quality retail development, or if the project targets an area where development is difficult or redevelopment is planned. Any questions on transportation development districts?
Hey, Tyler, this is Sarah. Can we go back to CID? Can you talk to me about timelines for CID? Are there timelines?
There are. So statute allows you to go up to 22 years if you're imposing that CID sales tax. And part of what we do, and we haven't noted it here, but typically what we do is when we get a request, whether it's TIF or RHID or CID from a developer, is we apply a similar but-for test to the CID request, just as we do these other tools. And that helps inform whether a full 22 years of collections is appropriate or whether something less than that full term is needed to make the project work.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think with that, we are ready for the last in our set of development tools, and that is special benefit districts, or SBDs. So benefit districts are kind of their own unique tool in that the city actually issues debt. The city does municipal temporary note issue and a municipal bond issue through a special benefit district structure, and the city issues that debt to fund construction projects for public infrastructure. So if you think of a new residential subdivision, the streets, the water, the sewer, those are the kinds of improvements that we can pay for through the issuance of special benefit district bonds. The city issues that debt, constructs the project, and then refinances the short-term construction debt into a long-term bond issue. And those long-term bonds are repayable anywhere from 10 years to 20 years. And the debt service on those bonds gets repaid from special assessments that are levied on properties in that benefit district. So if a homeowner purchases a home in a new subdivision and there's benefit district financing there, that homeowner pays their normal property tax bill each year. But in addition to that property tax bill and on the bill itself, the county will include whatever their annual assessment is, which is that house's share of the cost of financing the public infrastructure improvements for that subdivision. Typically, well, the city has had some history, of course, with benefit district financing. I don't think that we've seen requests or haven't entertained requests for benefit district financing in recent years, but it may be that we get requests for that kind of financing here in short order, depending on a few of the projects that are coming forward. In terms of city policy highlights, the duration of the bond issue and the apportionment of the costs to each of the homes or each of the properties in the benefit district are considered on a case-by-case basis, depending on how the properties or the subdivision is laid out. Sometimes it makes sense to assess each home equally within a subdivision. In other cases, maybe you have a benefit district that's a mix of, say, a commercial project and a few homes or a few apartment buildings. In that case, maybe it makes more sense to spread the assessments out on a different basis, not equally per property, but maybe per square footage of the different lots or for the valuation of each of the different lots. There's some flexibility under the statute how those special assessments get apportioned. Another critical aspect that's included in your policy for benefit districts is that a financial guarantee is required from the developer. So one of the things that looks like, typically that takes the form of like a letter of credit that a developer provides to the city at the time that the city starts making those public infrastructure improvements. The letter of credit is in place to cover a portion of the cost of the improvements in the event that the subdivision doesn't get built out as planned. If the subdivision doesn't get built out, or if development stalls and special assessments are delinquent before the project is completed, typically the city will have access to that letter of credit or the other security that the developer has provided, so city taxpayers aren't on the hook to repay the debt service on the municipal bonds that were issued. That letter of credit provides substitute security so that the taxpayers don't have to come out of pocket to do that. So happy to answer any questions on benefit districts as well.
Yeah, Tyler, this is Mike again. Yeah, on that, so I'm hearing you right, is there's no risk regard to the city. I think I saw something on there, it says something, and you said letter of credit, but this also said a guarantee by the developer. Is it one or the other or both?
Yeah, it's one or the other. We use financial guarantee kind of loosely. Typically that guarantee takes the form of a letter of credit, but if there were a developer that had, for instance, deep enough pockets and we wanted to get some sort of corporate or individual guarantee, and we, staff and your consultants, were comfortable that provided the same kind of protection for the city as, say, a letter of credit would, then we could entertain that instead.
Okay. I've just seen some loan guarantees not worth the paper they're written on, and the letter of credit certainly is a much better tool to secure it. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Yes.
If I can just jump in, one thing that we also see as an additional form of protection for the issuing community is typically the issuer will set the assessment rate at least a little bit higher than the bond rate, so that once the development is built out and you have, let's say, homeowners paying those assessments over 10 years, there is some chance, although it's relatively small, that some of those homeowners might be delinquent in paying their taxes and assessments. And so one of the things that Tyler and I often see is that assessment rate set a little bit higher than the bond rate, so that there's a little bit of cushion in the event that, you know, a small handful of property owners are late in paying their taxes and assessments.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
I actually had one for Tyler, if I could. So, Tyler, it's been a while since I've worked on a TDD assessment. In what kind of situation would a city maybe want to do a TDD assessment as opposed to a special benefit district? Are there advantages one way or the other?
There are advantages, and I have not done a TDD assessment, but I've done CID assessments, which are similar. There are a couple of key differences. So when a city establishes a special benefit district and issues benefit district bonds, those bonds are backed by property taxes. They're backed by the city's full faith and credit. So the taxpayers are literally on the hook collectively if special assessments aren't paid by the property owners in that benefit district. That makes the investment, the purchase of the bonds by an investor in the bond market much safer. And so the city pays a lower interest rate than if that security wasn't behind that bond issue. If you issue CID assessment bonds or TDD assessment bonds, those can be issued as revenue bonds or as general obligation bonds. So in other words, they can be backed just by the special assessments or by a combination of special assessments and the city's property taxes. And so having that flexibility, depending on what the project is, what the city wants to put behind the project in terms of pledging its own property taxes or not, can be the difference between using a benefit district with the city's full faith and credit and a property tax backing versus something like a CID or a TDD bond issue that's just a revenue bond issue, and the investor is on the hook and exposed to the risk that those assessments may not be paid.
So with all of that, I know that's a lot of information. There was a lot of words on the screen and we've explained a lot of different concepts, but do you have questions about any one of them or how those, again, how any of those tools might be used?
I have just a very generic question. So in our packet, there's the Economic Development Incentive Policy and Application. That's online to where somebody could access it and read about all of these incentives themselves?
At this exact moment, it is not online.
Okay.
We're reconstructing that page, but it is
Okay.
available and it can be sent to anyone who's requesting it.
Okay.
So we know, I believe the Coves was a special benefit district, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
It didn't get built out from years ago. I'm assuming there was no guarantee from the original developer. There was a lot of tax dollars lost that weren't paid in, shall I say, and then they eventually sold last year on the at a tax sale. It's now being built out, but what can we learn, I guess, as city, the commission and staff, to not be in that position again if somebody wants to, do a special benefit district?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I mean, I think that one of the things that we can do as a team is to try and make sure that we have the financial security, whether it's a letter of credit or some other protection in place from a developer that's asked for benefit district financing for a subdivision, to provide at least some protection for the taxpayers. The other piece of that is making sure that we have, as a team, kind of vetted developer requests for benefit districts. So if somebody comes in and says he or she wants to build a 200 home subdivision and they've only ever built 3 or 4 houses a year at a time, that's obviously something that that individual probably doesn't have experience to pull off. And that's an extreme example, but there's kind of an art and a science to vetting your developer partners to make sure that he or she isn't getting in over their head in terms of the size of the financing, size of the project, and even to drill down a little bit, whether you have a financial guarantee or not, you can decide as a city that you're not going to finance the entire 100% cost of the infrastructure in a subdivision. You can, for instance, say, well, you know, we'd like to participate here. Maybe it makes financial sense for the city to provide some help, some financial assistance to this project. But let's say the city pays for half of the infrastructure and the developer, either through cash or their own private financing, pays for the other 50%. You can structure that in a way where the developer's 50% of those costs and the developer's 50% of the cash contribution, financial contribution, comes in before the benefit district financing funds are spent. And so you have some additional protection there that the city's dollars aren't the first dollars in the project. And so you have maybe some critical mass or some inertia, some momentum, if you will, when the city's money goes in, to make sure that it's a bit more secure of an investment. So a few different things to think about when structuring benefit district projects. The risk is always there, but there are things that you can do if you're creative about it, to kind of structure things and mitigate some of those risks.
I would just add to that, Commissioners, as you know, the Coves was a unique example because of the timing, the collapse of 2008, and what that meant for housing, not just in our area, but around the country. You can hedge, and all of the things that Tyler said are absolutely correct, and they're good policy. In that case, may not have made a difference because of the size and scope of the problem nationally, and what we saw go on in particular with that developer to cease on the project. I would say that the statute kind of functioned the way it's supposed to, in that the city was protected in the sense that your special assessments remained. They had just added up to the place where the land was no longer going to be marketable, because they were not paid over time the way the statute contemplated them to be paid. They'd all kind of stacked up, and the economics of that deal had long since passed from 2008 to 2021 or 22. And recall that was again in the midst of an unusual event in a global pandemic, and we were dealing with then trying to sell off those lots. And deal with that, and thanks to Tyler's help, and the work of Melanie and Brian and Richard before him on the land bank, we were able to do some things to return that land to being marketable and build housing. But I think the bottom line is that development always carries an element of risk, and it is always incumbent on city policymakers to think about the city at large and not be swept up in the excitement of development. You know, we do housing studies every few years, and we get results that say we need more housing, but incentives always carry risk. And so it is always wise to step back and say what's in the best interest of the city at large. And those things that Tyler talked about specifically as hedges against that risk are always, it's a good thing for you all to consider carefully, before we rush into supporting development, whether it's 5 units, 8 units, or 50 units.
Well, and that's what I was going to remind everybody, as you did, of the '08 housing market crash that contributed to the Coves probably not being finished out. But that's I don't know if it was just as easy as somebody making an LLC, bringing a guarantee with that LLC, and then when the housing market crashed, there's filing bankruptcy, and really that guarantee, as Commissioner Skidmore said, isn't worth the paper it's written on. And that's why I like Tyler's idea of, if at least having the developer contribute 50% of it at least. At least we know a portion of it's paid for by the developer, and then the city's finishing out the remainder of it. So I just don't want to be caught holding the bag like we did on the Coves, if we do have somebody coming in and trying to use SBD, down the road.
And Commissioner, you make a good point. We did have a subdivision where that's exactly what happened. And then you get federal law in terms of bankruptcy protections, and those can preclude some recovery, when that sort of thing happens. I would note that what you've talked about and what you've just put your finger on fairly succinctly is the tension in the system, and developers who come before you, when you come back and say, we want you to bear 50% of the cost, or we want you to put up a letter of credit, that's when many developers say that city's not being development friendly. You're not giving us the right incentives. You're not helping us enough because you're putting up roadblocks to my development. But those roadblocks often exist for the protection of all of the taxpayers in the city at large. And so you have to be very discerning and try to be as wise as you can to determine what's the right balance between fueling with the incentive and protecting the rest of the community with the kinds of protections that Tyler's been talking about.
This is a question for you, Tyler or Bruce. I'm not sure which one, but when it comes to valuations or appraisals by the county and properties, and if there is a chance for them, or if they want to appeal it and delay, what then? Any protections we can have as a city to prevent that delay from happening?
That's a good question. Bruce, do you want to tackle that? Or you want me to
Sure.
tackle that?
So as it relates to benefit districts or CID or TDD assessments, the property valuation won't have any impact on the application of that assessment to that property. So that's really a separate consideration from the tax valuation. You know, in the situation of a TIF or an RHID or a tax abatement, that's where pay-as-you-go really benefits the city, because if that property value is less, either due to market conditions or due to an appeal or whatever the case might be, it will generate less tax and less tax increment, but then you simply reimburse less back to the developer, and you might reach the maximum term of the TIF note, let's say 15 years, without paying back the full amount that you agreed to should the taxes come in as originally projected. So that sort of earlier of reaching the maximum reimbursement or reaching the maximum term really does protect the city in that kind of a situation from having exposure beyond what it anticipated.
Okay, good, thanks.
Do we have any other questions?
I might just add here, first of all, thank you to Tyler and Bruce for going through all of these tools, and that they are really great resources for us. Anytime we have a question, we can easily reach out to them, and they're very good about getting back and not just explaining it in a way that just makes sense for the city, but also sometimes we need to be able to provide an answer back to the developer that's asking the question as well, and it's very helpful to have those explanations. And then just one more point, in your packet there was a brand new report. It's our 2024 annual economic development report. It's brand new, and I want to give credit to City Clerk Reed and our Assistant Finance Director McCurdy for putting that together, and they did an excellent job of getting all of the information and putting it in a, I think, readable format. And if you have suggestions, we're happy to hear any of those, as what other information might be helpful for our future versions of that for the end of 25 as well. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler and Bruce and Melanie as well for explaining all of that to us. We will move on to item 11B.
Request to consider an ordinance amending the common consumption area.
City Clerk Reed will present a request to consider amending the CCA to remain open year-round.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm here today to talk about our common consumption area. Staff is recommending that the governing body adopt an ordinance to allow the CCA to remain open year-round, eliminating the need for a separate CCA license application for each event. So some background on our common consumption area. If you recall, it was adopted on February 14th, 2024. We were issued our license by the state of Kansas on April 19th, and we opened the area on September 6th, 2024, following our logistical preparations. And just a reminder, the CCA was created as a tool to enhance downtime, vibrancy, and event participation. We issued 13 CCA licenses from September to December of 2024, and so far in 2025, we received 5 applications for licenses. If you recall, this was a dual application process. They had to fill out a special event checklist for the event as well as a CCA application to get their CCA license. As I talked about, the CCA is a visitor attraction. It adds to the downtown experience. Eliminating the CCA licensing would reduce the administrative time by 50%. Elimination of the CCA license requirement allows the CCA to be open daily from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. We have not, police department has not reported any safety incidences during any of the CCA events, which I know was a concern of the commission previously. With this amendment, we do remain to have some flexibility. It does have a clause in there for suspension authority by the city manager or the police department. And we would have the ability to reinstate requirements via future ordinances if the city commission decided at a time that they did not want to have this open full time. We were able to get the participating businesses' feedback over what they've seen the last year and how they've felt that the CCA has gone. We did not hear any negative about the CCA or not wanting to continue it. They were open to having it open year-round. Financial considerations, there would be a minimal cost for publication of the amended ordinance. Legal considerations, this has been reviewed and approved by City Attorney Finch. And I would stand for any questions, or we have either a recommended motion or an alternative option for you.
If I can, I know the Ottawa Main Street directors online. Sarah, would you be able to speak to businesses supporting keeping it open year-round? I know it's been mentioned that they support it, but what are you hearing from them?
Oh, Sarah there.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Sorry, I'm in Philadelphia.
You're a bit echoey though.
Yeah. Hold on.
We need some on-hold music here. Well, while we're waiting for Sarah, you had mentioned that it would decrease the workload by approximately 50%. Do you know about how much time is spent on an application?
So an application comes into the city clerk's office. It's then sent out to all the department directors for review. And then at that time, it comes back, and then we have to manually issue the license. So I'm going to say an hour, hour and a half, just kind of depends on, but it's that collection of data, and they're seeing it twice, right? They're seeing the event for the special event, and then they're seeing it for the CCA license as well. One of our recommendations is to add to the special event the option for them to be able to close that. So I'm thinking family events downtown or children events that they would be able to do that, where the city manager or the police department could review that and close that for those type of events.
Have there been
I'm
some
here now.
requests? Oh,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So the one thing by doing it and having it open all the time, it actually gets away from confusion of knowing when it is open and when it's closed. That's been the biggest thing for the businesses downtown, and it lets us enhance on it a little bit more.
Sarah,
But
have
as
there
far
been
as the
people-
businesses being happy with it, they haven't seen any negative from it.
Sarah, this is Mike. Have you had some requests for the month of February to have this, or is that just kind of year-round is just easier to monitor than certain months?
I am honestly waiting on a lot of applications to send through right now. If it doesn't get approved to be year-round, it does take a process. I haven't had a time that, I guess winter was a little slower, but and we have people from outside Ottawa University. We've had people that are coming and doing homecoming class reunions, ask us to open it up, different things like that.
City Attorney Finch.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor, Commissioners. Just kind of a refresher as much for the commission and for anybody who might be listening online. This does not allow someone to bring alcohol from home and walk around downtown with that. It does not allow them to go to a packaged liquor store and purchase a case of beer and walk down Main Street. This is only for drinks that are dispensed by a licensed retailer. So if you think about the restaurants downtown that might serve alcohol, this doesn't do away with the special cup requirement. They still have to, it has to be in a cup from that retailer. It does not allow for unauthorized sales. People who don't normally have a liquor license or act in that trade, they would still have to get a special event permit. That would still be subject to all the additional scrutiny and requirements. This is only to say that for those retailers that are already doing this and have the cups and people stay within the designated area and all of that, the time restrictions would be removed. The requirement to get a city license on top of what they're already doing would be removed. But all of the other strictures would remain both in state law and our city ordinance. So just want to clarify, this is not a free-for-all. To walk up and down Main Street is not becoming Bourbon Street in New Orleans. You still have to follow all of the other rules. This just eliminates the need for folks to have to come get a permit from the city every time they want to use the area.
Do we have any questions?
Hearing that, and then hearing that there's really no complaints from any of the Main Street individuals, and then seeing that there's been 18 events with no issues. We talk about having a vibrant downtown and making things easier for folks to enjoy our downtown. And this would just be eliminating some red tape, some regulation. And I mean, I think it's a great idea, quite honestly.
I agree. I think it's a bit different than some other communities are doing. So I think it kind of sets us apart a little bit for our downtown. Do you have any other thoughts? How would we like to proceed?
I'll make the motion that we adopt an ordinance to amend the common consumption area to remain open year-round with the provision that the city manager or chief of police may close the area at their discretion.
Sarah Kaler will second.
Okay. Any other discussion? Can we have roll call vote, please?
How do you vote, Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Kaler?
Yes.
Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Clayton? And Mayor Allen?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for your work on that. We'll move on to item 11C.
Request for approval to purchase replacement front loader.
City Manager Silcott will present a request for approval to purchase an unscheduled replacement front loader, providing details on the need for replacement and associated costs.
Honorable Mayor and Commissioners, I'll be presenting this on behalf of Director DJ Welsh, who's absent due to illness, and I want to thank him for his work on constructing this report, and also to our public works staff who are on hand, our street superintendent, Chad Bentley, and our fleet mechanic, Chris Raby. And so they can answer any technical questions that you may have related to the front loader's usage and its maintenance history. But what we have here is loader 148, which is a 2001 case 621C that has approximately 8,000 hours of operation and has essentially reached its end of useful life. Since 2019, we've put in a minimum of 15,000 in repair parts, and it is having a repetitive cracking of the bell housing. And this most recent occurrence, which was the third time, was estimated to be at 20,000 from case to make that repair. And again, this was the third specific failure of that part. The estimated total cost, we performed two different analyses on that because we do use this quite heavily. 350 hours from flood control, log jam removal, snow removal, and here's some pictures of its most recent repair. And so what we did is we utilized two different asset analyses, the maintenance to cost as well as the replacement asset value for a ratio, and we also did the life cycle cost and applied those two approaches, and both of those exceeded the best practices thresholds for deciding whether or not a repair or replacement of the piece of equipment was warranted. And we solicited 3 bids. With that, we solicited 4, received 3. With that, the case dealer was the best bid, coming in with a trade-in value of $179,652. And with that, we would have this unscheduled replacement to occur within Fund 53, which is our general fund equipment reserve. Even though this is unfunded, we do not need to justify or to come up with internal offsets or supplemental appropriation because it's an unplanned purchase. So therefore, we have sufficient fund balance and expenditure authority for the purpose. And with that being said, staff's recommendation is to go ahead and authorize the purchase of this vehicle as continuing. Its utilization with the repair would represent a diminished fiscal prudence and also increase our potential for operational downtime with this purchase. If you have any questions over the analysis or specifically its utilization and maintenance history, I have Chris Raby here to answer that, as well as its usage with Chad.
Was this piece of equipment purchased brand new? So we've had it since 2001? Okay. So the age is more of the contributing factor, not necessarily a user error, because the first one didn't happen for almost 19 years. And then it's just been a couple, the 3 times since then. It's more of an age factor than a user error. Sorry, anybody else?
I just had a question about, so it's a case, we've got experience with operating a case. The other 2 were different brands. This case is something we're familiar with operating and no issues there with a learning curve, I suppose. Good. I like answers that are a lot shorter than my question.
Do we have any other questions?
Did we look at a possible sale on Purple Wave for this? Or would that have affected any kind of trade-in with that case dealer?
Yes, we received a significant or relatively significant trade-in, as the original estimate was $192,074, and so we're getting just under $180,000 purchased for that. So $12,000. And if you look as far as what the values are, it's in the ballpark as 192, 198, and 222,000 for the 3 bids that were received.
Any other questions?
I know I saw in there the snow removal. That's always an important part of our yearly life here in our community. I'm appreciate seeing it there used there, and also as far as the Great Log Jam, we don't want another one of those, I know, and getting that taken care of. Is there anything else this time of year? I don't know if it's if it's something we need to consider today, or wait another week, or if we want to take action today. I'm okay either way. But there's something, I saw the 14-day, I believe, delivery date on that. Is that what that was?
Yes, I believe so.
10 to 14 days. Is there something of need that we need to have it in the next 2 weeks, or what's your assessment on that?
The need is something that obviously could be unanticipated, and I know it's often utilized as well for assisting with the operation of the floodgates, and I can defer to our Superintendent Bentley for his discussion on how it's utilized in assisting with the closure of the gates.
You had me at floodgates. so I appreciate that. And I do appreciate getting the bids like you did. It looks like someone that spent a lot of time and work getting this put together, so I appreciate this. So I'll make the motion, we go ahead and approve the purchase of this front loader.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? May I have roll call vote, please?
How do you vote, Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
Commissioner Kaler?
Yes, sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem Clayton?
I think I
You
heard a
joined
yes.
us. Yes.
Yep.
And Mayor Allen?
And I vote yes. Motion carries. That'll move us on to item 11D.
Consideration of a new cereal malt beverage license for pizza.
Due to the recent sale of the business, the new owners of Pizza Time have submitted a cereal malt beverage license application for the commission's review and consideration, and we'll have City Clerk Reed present on this.
Hi. So staff is recommending the governing body approve the new cereal malt beverage for Pizza Time, which is now under new ownership. The previous license was held under prior ownership, and our municipal code does not allow for transferable alcohol licenses. As you recall, the CMB is defined as beer with no more than 6%, and the applicant is requesting on-premises consumption. The police department and city attorney have reviewed and approved the applications with no violations or concern notes. The city does utilize the KBI background check at no cost for our CMB applications. And upon approval, the city clerk will collect fees and affix the stamp CMB license. The annual fee for this license is $225, which includes a $25 state CMB fee. And it's under Ottawa Municipal Code Chapter 3, Article 3, which regulates our CMB licenses. And at this time, we would recommend a motion or refer the item to April 23rd for further deliberation. I would stand for any questions.
Commissioners, do we have any questions?
I'll make the motion. We approve the CMB license for Pizza Time at 208 South Main Street.
Commissioner Kaler will second.
All of the seconds. Do we have any other discussion? May I have roll call vote, please?
Do you vote, Commissioner Kaler?
Yes.
Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Clayton?
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore?
Yes.
And Mayor Allen?
And I vote yes. Motion carries. That'll move us on to item 12, comments by our city manager.
We'll keep this relatively brief. I want to highlight a couple of the upcoming items at the OMA for the community. We'll have a murder mystery on June 13th, which is time to coincide with Friday the 13th for Murder on the Disoriented Express. And if you've read the Agatha Christie novel, I won't spoil how it goes for those who haven't. And then a Taste of Ireland coming up here in May, so about a month from today, for some traditional Irish dancing and with a contemporary flair. So if you're interested in any of those, please give it a shout and a look. I want to roughly touch on some highlights for our operations here around the city. We will be cleaning the tracks along the floodgates tomorrow, and this could have some interruptions. We've done some notifications and utilization not only on social media but with our Everbridge system. So we appreciate our our IT folks for assisting in getting the message out. So there could be some limited traffic interruptions, and this will begin around 5:30, and we anticipate having the roadway opened by 7 when we do the closure. The Streets Division will be exercising those gates the following day on Friday, and again by 7. And then we want to highlight that our robotic mowers have been delivered and are utilizing GPS and have dedicated charging stations and are quiet, neighbor friendly, and are now able to mow while golfers are on the course or at night. And we'll probably give you some updates and maybe even some videos on how that's unfolding here, because I think it's a shape of things to come. And for those who are interested, apparently they even sell residential type models as well. So, and want to highlight some activities that Public Works has done within our Parks Division there with the new grill pad at Shelter 3 in Forest Park. And you may not be aware, but we are in pre-pool mode. So as you can see, they're repairing plumbing in the pool house, and the annual getting the pool turnaround ready has started. And we're working in Hope Cemetery and preparing for the mowing season and trail maintenance. And that concludes my report. If there are no questions for myself or another member of the team.
I saw that the clubhouse was delivered, I guess, recently for the golf course. Can you tell us about that and what's the status?
I'll let
Or
Director Landis
our golf
have
pro.
that. She's been overseeing that since before my arrival with the city 2 years ago. So we're grateful for that.
Yeah.
It was delivered. They are still working to put it together. I believe that the ramp was delivered today, and there's a little more work that needs to be done out there, just in the area itself. And so we'll just be working towards getting that up and going. And we're targeting the end of the month, but there's some work to be done just overall.
A lot of golfers out there already. So good sign. So
It's very busy.
great.
Thank you. That'll move us on to comments by our governing body. We'll start with Commissioner Crowley.
I have no comments.
Commissioner Skidmore.
I have none comment. Yeah.
Commissioner Kaler. Commissioner Kaler, are you there? We'll move on to Commissioner Clayton.
I just want to, next Saturday, April 19th, at 8 a.m., we are starting a downtown cleanup, starting at Haley Park. If any groups or any folks would like to come, we're trying to clean up the alleyways of trash and street corners. Followed by at 10 a.m., that same day, there's an Easter egg hunt downtown with 13,000 Easter eggs, so feel free to come out with families and kids and check that out.
Thank you. We'll circle back to Commissioner Kaler.
Yes, sorry, none at this time.
Thank you. And I have no comment. That'll move us on to announcements. On April 16th, we have a City Commission meeting at 10 a.m. here at City Hall. April 23rd, City Commission meeting at 4 p.m. and April 30th, City Commission meeting at 4 p.m.